All right, everyone able to see my screen now? Thumbs up? Yes, excellent. Welcome to North Seattle Tech Talks, Surviving the Tech Hiring Process. This is, I think, our fifth time doing a very similar talk. It is always interesting and always busy, one of our busiest ones. We have currently over 94 participants right now. I expect that to roll up as we go forward. For those of you that don't know me, which is a lot of you, your first timers, my name is Steve Balo. I'm the host of North Seattle Tech Talks. I'm also the Technical Employment Program Manager at North Seattle College. That's a really long-winded way of saying that I help people get internships and jobs when they're in our bachelor's programs. And I work with two bachelor's programs now, the Application Development Bachelor's Program and the new Computer Science Bachelor's Program, which I'll talk about both in just a second. If you want to get a hold of me, easiest way is my college email. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. If we haven't met before, I just ask that you please let me know how you found me on LinkedIn and put that in the little message when you request to connect. Besides working at the college for the past 6 years, I'm also a developer. I was previously an engineering manager at Adobe Systems and a developer before that for many years. And so I've definitely been through the interview process on both sides, probably interviewed more people than I've been an interviewer, but interviewee rather. But I have some perspective. However, I'm handing that perspective over to much smarter people than myself today, who I'll introduce you to in just a minute. I do want to give a land acknowledgement, as is customary for North Seattle College. We want to honor the location and the traditional and contemporary territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Duwamish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish tribes, without which we wouldn't have access to this space. And as I sort of want to do with this meetup, we don't just want you to read that text. We'd really like you to engage. I recommend you head over to nativeland.ca, not right now, but later. Take a look at the global sort of map that they have, which has overlapping histories and boundaries of various indigenous groups, where they are now, where they were, information about them, Wikipedia articles, as well as actions that you can actually take to take it beyond just the information stage. I have to give a shout out to our event sponsors. One is, I'd ask that you please stay muted if you can while we go through this. We have so many guests, we're up to 100 now, and that'd be great, thank you. Our first event sponsor is the primary group that I work with, which is the Application Development Bachelor's Program. This is a bachelor's completion degree where you can earn a bachelor's degree and focusing on web, mobile, cloud, and data science. This is a lot of hands-on work. One of our speakers is a graduate of the program. We have a lot of other people online I know that are graduates of the program, and some of our current students in that program. You not only get to work with cool technology, but I will work with you too. So if that's a good thing, that's up to you, but I'll help you find an internship or a job. And we also are going to be introducing a new program coming up here in the fall. This is the BS in Computer Science. We don't have a fancy logo for it yet because it has not yet launched. If you're interested, you can go to this website for more information to sign up to get informed when we are ready to open applications. I will note that our application development program actually has applications open for fall. So those of you who are completing an associate's degree or have a previous bachelor's degree and you want to get a technical focus, you can take a look at the information there and definitely reach out if you have questions. Some quick housekeeping things. We are recording this session. So if you're on video, if we're unmuted, you will be recorded. This will be posted to YouTube and shared out to the meetup group. So we do ask that you please stay muted unless you're presenting or have been called on for more information by one of our presenters. For questions in general, please feel free to use the chat functionality. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the entire process. So if a speaker doesn't see a question or we have the open Q&A, that's where we'll pull them from. And the slides that you see and the slides that some of our presenters will be sharing will be shared with you. If you signed up and RSVP'd via the meetup, you'll get it sent automatically. If you didn't, just sign up to the meetup itself and you'll get an email later in the week with the link to the recording and the link to the slides, as well as a survey. The survey is helpful for us to know how we're doing and how we can improve going forward. I want to call out, because again, we have a lot of first timers here, the guiding principles for our tech talks. These are the 4 I's. The first one is information. The most basic step is, we want you to get information, something you didn't know before. Second is inclusion. We are looking to represent, empower, and welcome everyone. If we're not doing this to the fullest extent and we can improve, let us know that in the survey, reach out directly, whatever you feel comfortable doing. The third is insight. It's great to know that something is the way it is, that a process for hiring is the way it is. Knowing why is extremely powerful and enlightening. And lastly, as I hinted at in the land acknowledgement, we don't just want to sort of have information. We would like you to actually take it and do something. So hopefully today, whether you are a hiring manager or someone going out into the field for the first time, you're going to get some information that will help you change in a positive way the way you go through this process. Our agenda is pretty straightforward. I will mostly stop talking and to just be the question person, hand things over to first Nadia, Asia, Samuel, Giselle, and Dan, one after another. And then we'll have an open Q&A. So for those that have very specific questions, you feel free to ask them in those individual sections. I will try to keep things moving. So if that goes a little long, I'll move things along. And we'll have plenty of time to do open Q&A at the end. I will also try to make sure that we do close on time so you can all get back to your evenings. So these are the questions that I had posed in the meetup group itself. And our speakers are going to take little bits of this and also, explore more of this in the Q&A. But basically, what is a process for actually finding roles that are out there in tech, searching, networking, and researching the organizations and the roles themselves? What does the application and screening process look like at various organizations? How do we simplify this? How much time do we put into this? How many applications do we fill out? Third, one that comes up very frequently in the questions, what does a technical interview process look like at various organizations? How can you address this? How can you use good problem-solving techniques? What are other tips and tricks that will help you in this process? And lastly, because we have less than 2 hours, and this is an immense amount of content to cover, what are other resources that we can get so we can explore this further? So that's a lot to cover, as I said, but again, have some awesome, talented people here, and hopefully you'll have some great questions to ask. Again, if you haven't already, if you somehow got here via another Zoom link, please sign up at meetup.com/North Seattle Tech Talks to get more information. You'll get the slides and recordings, and you can actually explore the old Tech Talks from previous years as well on the site. All right. I am going to go ahead and hand things over to Nadia to get rolling.
All right, am I sharing my screen then? Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. Here we go. Share and view. Slideshow. Hey, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. I am Nadia Bahrami. I work at Reddit. I recently joined them in November, so I literally just went through the interview process. So hopefully you can learn some stuff from me in this slide deck. I am a software engineer there on their safety team. So I do enforcement and safety for, I guess, at-risk groups kind of things, stuff like that. So let's get going. So first things first, how do you find the role, right? If you're working and it's your first time out into the field, how do you find the role? Well, the first thing you have to ask is, are you looking for a specific role or are you looking for just any job? And if you want a specific company, the best thing to do is go to their career sites or find people on their Twitter, essentially, or link or reach out via the LinkedIn. Networking is really, really important. Referrals get you a long way. Typically, so I actually have a friend who works at D&D Beyond because he followed D&D Beyond's Twitter page and they said, we are hiring. And he DM'd them directly and said, I'm not ready to interview now. Can I interview in 2 months? And they said, absolutely. And he now regularly plays in multiple Dungeons and Dragons games with their entire SRE team, because that's what they do there. So if you are actually looking for a specific company, make sure you follow all of the possible ways to get to them, whether it's reaching out to people on LinkedIn or Twitter, or going to career sites. As far as finding opportunities, if you're just trying to get a job because it's like your first job and you don't really know what you want to do, I mean, the classics are going to be Indeed and Glassdoor. LinkedIn, especially now, they have networking and availability flags, but recruiters are hitting people on the daily. So if you can actually reach out and make a connection with a recruiter who might be doing introductory positions, that would actually be a way to ship yourself, is essentially contact them, supply your resume, and then they will do half of the work for you. Will you get your ideal job that way? Probably not. But if it's the first job out the door, it's a good way to do it. Personally, when I went through this for my first job, I came from a code school background, by the way. I did not get a bachelor's. I was a graduate of a program called Code Fellows. So I did biology before this. So it's not like I'm talking to you like I went through like a Stanford program. That's not what happened for me. So essentially, I did a shotgun method when I first started because I didn't know where I wanted to work. And I applied rapidly to a bunch of different places. And the reason is because once you hit that 6-month mark in experience, recruiters will hit you constantly. So this is something where you just kind of need to get in if you're a first timer. If you are if you already are in the industry and are looking for your next job, then you definitely want to check out more Glassdoor pages and try and narrow down exactly what you're looking for by doing research up front. Meetups like this, it's a great way to network. Finding people here, meeting people here, that's one way to reach out and expand your network and see who else people know, right? So that's how you're going to get or how do you know where to apply and find your role? Those are a bunch of different ways. Networking, highly important. And that's my point there. Moving on is the application process. So if you're going to be applying, which all of you will be, resumes have to be clear and concise. And what I mean by that is the first people to see this is not the hiring manager. The first person to see your resume is always the HR person. And that's after, especially for larger corporations, that they scan the resume for keywords that they're already looking for. So a computer is actually going to go over your resume before a human sees it typically. So that's in the bigger organizations, not common. So the HR people are going to be the first ones to see you. So, you know, tech skills at the top. And when I say something like one resume per role type, that can be a bit confusing. What I mean by that is if you are going for a job as a software engineer, you're going to have one resume for software engineer. If you are thinking, well, I don't know if I want to be a software engineer or a product manager, like a TPM is a different role. Okay, so what you're going to do is make that more organizational, more customer and client facing kind of resume. One for engineering is going to be more technical. It's going to be more engineering focused. So if you are thinking of just jumping into the tech field, but you don't know where it is, you can't just necessarily supply one resume for those types. Now, if you're all engineering focused, you should just have one resume for engineering. If you want to do something like TPM or program management, then go down that route, but don't use one general resume for a broad spectrum of role types, I guess is what I'm saying. And the last thing is have multiple people review it. And I don't just mean tech people. I mean like parents or friends or people with lit majors so they can check syntax and like spelling and formatting. This is actually really, really important because after you get through HR, normal people have to read this. So it's really important that what you're doing is clear and concise and it's not like hard to consume. Cover letters. So the application process, everybody knows, very frustrating when you have to upload your resume and then go and do the drop downs for like XY jobs, because even though they have you upload the resume, they want you to go through a huge process. The resume is supposed to be very clear and focused so that you never have to modify it once you use it. The cover letter, it says formulaic customization. What do I mean by that? That makes no sense because formulaic means standard, customized means custom. And really on cover letters, nobody really reads them, but if they are required on the upload, you have to supply it. There are recruiters out there who, if you do not supply it, will throw your resume off the pile because there's going to be 20 people who also supplied it, right? So they follow directions, okay? So what you essentially do is come up with a formula. Dear whatever, that always changes. The first paragraph is about yourself, 3 sentences. The second paragraph is about, I think I would be good for this job because of this. I think this would be a great company for you to work at because of this. Thank you for considering me. And then you sign your name. Very formulaic. You only change it in 3 spots. And that's really, really what you're going to have to do. So it's easy, it's quick. Just make sure you're doing the changes so you don't upload, something for Reddit then you meant like, I don't know, Microsoft, right? There are different companies. It would be a big red flag if we see the wrong company there. Okay, so once you actually get the interview, what happens? First, at least for most of the resume or for most of the interviews I've gone through over the last 5 years, there's always going to be a behavior section. So it's behavioral questions, and this is team fit. Okay. This is to make sure that you're not somebody who's going to destroy the team, that you fit the culture, that you are a sane person who's trying to work with these other people. So what you should always do is Google just general questions like, describe to me a challenge you faced in the workplace. What is a problem that you've seen when working on a big project doing code merging, right? How did you resolve this, right? So first is have set answers. So this is something where you actually do want to practice this. So look up questions, come up with clear, concise answers and responses. If you come from a background that is not traditional, AKA going from a college bachelor's program into an internship pipeline into a job kind of thing, embrace your backstory. I had a molecular biology background, so I regularly said, all my time in the lab organizing projects with the mice and balancing budgets and all that really made me data analytics focused. And that's something that I highlighted both on my resume and in my conversations, especially when getting that first job, right? Because I don't have the experience to talk about what I did, when a cluster went down in Kubernetes. How did I bring that back up? I don't have that experience yet if it was my first job. Now I can call upon different problems and things because I've been in the industry for 5 years. But if it's your first job, you're going to have to try and embrace your own backstory and find creative answers to some of these problems. If they are asking targeted ones, obviously you want to reflect on your time at school or whatever projects you've been working on. Always have the solution. That sounds really intimidating. I don't mean you have to be right. What I mean is if they say, hey, describe to me a time you had a problem that was a conflict between people. If you sit there like, well, this one time this person and I disagreed, and so, I just kind of went off and did my thing. That's not a solution, right? This is not a solution that is feasible for a teamwork driven environment, right? What they want to hear more is, there was a time there was conflict. We resolved it by doing X, Y, Z, right? You can always show a problem, but if you don't show how you resolved it in the answer, they're going to leave you with these open-ended questions. And the reason they leave you with these open-ended questions is to see where you go with it. And if you don't have a solution to what the question is actually asking for, then that's not going to be a good reflection on you, if that makes sense. Being concise and confident, that has to do with practice, but also the longer you talk and the longer you go on, the more you might get yourself out of the position. right? So if you have a long rambling story about this time that you had trouble with a project, you might start saying stuff that questions your abilities or questions your resolution skills or anything, right? So this is why it's very, very important to go back to the first bullet point, have set answers and practice these things. They're almost as important, I would argue just as important as technical skills, especially since we are all doing remote work. Remote work is very difficult to collaborate across unless you have good communication skills. And that's part of this, okay? Always have at least one question for them. Doesn't matter what it is. I always ask, what do you like about your job and what do you dislike about your job, right? Because that gives me insight into what they think is a bad part in their company and their job and what a good part is, right? And if you ask that same question to everybody down the line, you're going to get different levels of different people, and you can get kind of a picture of the environment you're about to step in if you take the job. Okay, so technical interview. This is where you have passed the behavioral interview. They're moving you on to the on-site, which these days are virtual. First step, make sure all of your equipment works. I have had an interview where my camera went down. It was not great. It didn't matter too much, but it did put the interviewer in an awkward position when their camera is on and they can't see me, right? We want to try and humanize each other, despite the fact we're all virtual and not really working in the same room that way. So make sure everything is working. Okay, so when it actually comes to the technical interview and practicing for that, if you can break down your problems essentially into these 5 steps, and I do mean practice like this, it will be a lot easier when you actually get to the technical portion of the interview. So the first thing is define the environment. So what I mean by that is to ask questions of your interviewer. The interviewers have come from meetings typically. They just got your resume probably like 10 minutes before this happens. They're trying to give you a question and check your abilities. So if they give you something like, I'm going to give you a string, please write a function that tells me if it's a palindrome or not when you rearrange the letters, right? Start asking questions, being like, does a single letter count? Do I have to account for punctuation? Does punctuation count as part of the palindrome? What about alphanumerics? Is this going to be a clean string or do I have to clean it first? That's all about defining your own environment to limit the scope. If you can limit the scope of what you're taking on, it makes it a lot clearer what you have to do when you're stressed out under an interview condition. Write your base test cases. That's next step 2. So take a second to do base casing. So palindrome problem again. That would be like A, B, A, B, B, A, B, C. 4 cases, that's all you need, move on. And then pseudocode, if you haven't had a lot of practice, this is really important. It essentially defines what you need to do. So you say define palindrome test, and then go through and say, I need to strip out punctuation. I need to check how many letters are non-repeating or uniques, all that. And then the last one is step 4 and step 5. This is interesting. So get to the solution. Obviously, everybody wants to get to a solution. Refactor and optimize. If this is your first job, or this is not a Facebook or Google or the big dogs, step 4 is all about brute force. You are trying to get to a solution as much as possible, and then you refactor after you have the solution, okay? If this is one of the bigger companies, what you're actually going to do is talk through getting to the brute force solution. And then you're going to try and do the most optimized version as quickly as possible. And the reason for that is because the Google interview is purposely designed that every single question will take longer than an hour to address. And they want to see what you do under pressure, and they want to see what you do when you have such a large problem to face. So if you go with the brute force method first, you're not going to look great and you'll never actually have a chance to optimize or refactor. So if this is your first gig and it's not a huge company like that, like one of the big names, just get to the solution as quickly as possible and either talk through the refactor and optimization, or if you have time, go through it yourself. That's what I would advise most. My Reddit interview, there was definitely 2 that I brute forced without the refactor and optimization, and I talked through the optimization, and that was a totally acceptable thing to do. The whole point, though, is to be communicative throughout the process. This is all being done over remote right now. So one of the big things you should ask is, can I Google stuff? And it seems obvious, but they might say, yes, we're going to treat this like you are working. Just tell me what you are Googling, tell me what you are doing, and then we'll be okay. So this is definitely something you want to ask is, can I Google during this interview process? Because that is acting like you're an actual dev in a dev environment. So just talk through everything. And for those of you who are internal thinkers and can't type and think at the same time, you literally have to say to your interviewer, hey, I'm going to take a second to think about this problem. I'm going to go quiet for about a minute. And they will say, okay, as long as you are being communicative about that, because otherwise your silence can be interpreted as you being lost. And if you are lost, they're going to try and help you and may derail you onto a different path. So it will throw your interview. Okay. So just be communicative. That's the key. And then that's pretty much it. So as far as code challenges, things to apply those 5 steps to: HackerRank, obviously everybody knows that, and Code Wars, that's my personal favorite one. I also go by Cracking the Code interview every single time. And if you want to talk to me, there I am on LinkedIn, Nadia Bahrami. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Fantastic, thank you. That was a lot of information, really valuable. And you're getting praise already in the chat. All right, Aisha, if you are ready to go, you are up next.
I'm just gonna +1 to everything Nadia said, and there it is. There it is.
That was brief. There we go.
Yeah, it was good. It was great. That was great. I second the Cracking the Code. It's a really good book. So I'm Aisha. I am a program manager at Microsoft. I think my experience or my journey to tech is a little bit different than pretty much everyone else's. I did 4 years in the Air Force and then 16 years in the Marine Corps, and came straight from the military into tech. And I just hit my 3-year mark 10 days ago. And since I've been in tech, I've brought 300 other people with me to various companies, whether it's Microsoft, Google, PlayStation, EA, you name it. I'll talk to anybody, anywhere about anything and get someone hired. So that's kind of the persona that I take on. So when it comes to finding opportunities, I really like to talk to people and understand, what do you want to do? Most people start with, I don't know. That's great. All right, what are you good at? And I always ask people, what are you good at? What are you naturally good at? And then tell me the things you aren't good at, and how can I help you figure out which of the things you're not good at that you really want to get good at? Because it's one thing to be great at a skill. Okay, good. It gets boring after a while. What about the things you aren't so good at? Maybe you're not really good at negotiation and you really want to learn how to negotiate. Maybe you're really not good at being organized, and it's a skill that you need to be an adult in this world. Like, you have to learn how to be organized. Any of those things. So how do I help you get there? And then we start identifying different opportunities that can, one, take the skills that you have, but also point out what you want to build into. And what I really like to do is when I read someone's resume, I'm like, tell me the story. Give me the information. Working with the veteran community, one thing that I know firsthand, and then I know watching, my wife's about to get out in October. That's a headache and a half trying to get her to understand, because I've already been down that path now, but we have a lot of skills in the military, but you're not taught the civilian words for them. So You could have been a program manager for the last 10 years and you have no idea because you don't understand what a program is, how it operates, what's change management, like all these things that you do for every single operation that we do, any exercise that we do, the things you have to build up and do a Lodex for, gather all your supplies and follow the logistics chains, all those things, but you just don't know the words. So really being able to teach that translation. And it doesn't matter if this is your first job and you're, all right, tell me about what you did in high school. Tell me about your projects. Tell me, it doesn't matter the range. It's really about teaching people how to tell their story. Because one of the very important parts of the interview is communication. It's the storytelling aspect. Like you have to be able to be received. And if you're not received, well, you need to figure out, all right, what's the barrier and how do I go over it or through it? Brute force, if you will. See, Nadia, I'm capitalizing Nadia. I'm going to use keywords. So how does networking play a role on that? I'm the networking and pivot princess. I'll talk to anybody. Steve, how do we meet?
Through Sherry's meetup, just like this. It was another meetup like this, a little smaller group, but yeah, just started chatting and then, yeah.
And then he reached out to me and was like, hey, would you be interested in this? I was like, all right, let's do it. For me, I'll talk to anybody, any day, anytime, anywhere about anything. Or if you're like, hey, I really want to work at this company, I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's reach out to somebody and let's set up a conversation. Let's have a coffee chat. Look, my persistence right now is I've been trying to get on Team Xbox. So what did I do? I donated some time and some money to be able to spend time with the Xbox executives because I'm going to ask them, excuse me, who's hiring? But that's how I operate. So when you start to network, you want to talk to you have to talk to people. It's hard to communicate on an island of one. And even if you only talk to one person, if that person can amplify your voice and be like, hey, I got a friend that's looking for this. Hey, I know someone that's looking for this. I know someone who's really good at this. The more people are talking about you, the more people you're going to be connected to. And if you're not a talker and you're a typer, get on LinkedIn, fire away. Get on Twitter. Twitter gets you noticed very quickly. Very, you've ever been in a Twitter storm, you'll see like, just put yourself out there. It's as unique as everyone thinks that they are. There is someone who has the same interests, who you may be the missing piece to their, their puzzle. Like, you know what, I can't figure this out. But you've been walking around with that information your whole life. So, but it's all about being able to connect those pieces. So in order that you have to network, networking is paramount. What research should you do in advance of applying? I'm not saying you have to have every single skill that the job requires, but you might want to have an idea of what you're getting into. As someone who has jumped into a pool without looking and found myself in a 20-foot pool, I would say that you might want to look to see where you're going. That way, you have your aim and you have your actual. You might be aiming for a product manager role, but you end up in a data analyst role just because while it says product manager, but the actual roles and responsibility kind of read more like data analyst. So you want to make sure that you're actually reading and understanding what are the job descriptions? What does this mean? And ask questions. Reach out to people on LinkedIn. There's some people from Microsoft on this call. We'll look who is hiring, who posted that. All right, cool. Hey, this is the person that posted that. Connect with them on LinkedIn. Ask them, can you have a conversation? We all do that. We all do that. I know we all do that. If you have someone who's looking and they connect with you and they're like, can you help me get in touch with someone about this role? We're going to help. It's the natural thing. But fill the role out. And always remember, in any interview, you hold all the cards. Like, you're the asset. Like, a business's main capital is the people. Like, a business can't run without the people. And you should walk in there like you already have the role. You just have to find a reason to tell them that you don't want them, not the other way around. That's the type of confidence that I walk in with. And that's what I encourage everyone else to have that type of confidence when they walk in, because the role will not define you. The job will not define you. The company will not define you. And you want to make sure that if you're having an interview, and for any reason, if the interview starts to go awry, and ask yourself, is it me? And if it's not, then that might not be the company for you. And be okay with walking away. And that's a learning experience too. What's your advice for people who are searching worldwide to work for other countries? Oh, I look at global companies. So there are tons of global companies out there. And what I do is I typically, because I like to travel, I like to be remote. I like to be wherever I'm at on whatever day. Like today, I'm in San Diego. Tomorrow, I'll be in Redmond. Friday, I'll be in Mississippi, coming to a theater near you. I'm always somewhere different. But I look to see where they have hubs. And then I look to see if they are remote. And if they are, let's go. Or maybe they have a hub or an office, or they're hiring in a country that I know that I will be in. Apply and ask. You can always ask, like, hey, if this is a remote role, do you mind that if, I mean, I think I was in Japan for my first 6 months at Microsoft because my wife was stationed there, and I still worked my American hours, but I was just in a different place. So when in doubt, ask. A closed mouth will never get fed. So you have to make sure that you empower yourself to ask the questions, and always advocate for that if it's important to you. Application and screening process. Be your first screener. If I gave you 30 jobs to choose from, all 30 of them, don't apply. You can be like, no, too demanding. Nope, I do not know what this means, can't do it. Be your first set of screening, right? Then look at your resume. Okay, what aligns? Okay, nothing aligns. All right, well, what from these roles do I want to do? And how can I get the skill sets that can build into it? And you can do one of two things. You can put yourself on a learning path to fill those knowledge gaps, or you can be like, all right, let's look for things that I do have on my resume and change your keywords. And that's just one way, because remember, the way in isn't always the way up and or the way out. Sometimes you actually gotta be in to figure out where you're gonna go left and right. I came to Microsoft as one thing, and I've moved around just looking like, ooh, this looks fun over there. That looks fun too. And I just want to try everything. So don't be afraid to, I do not like to get your foot in the door. But I mean, sometimes a foot in the door is a foot in the door. Once you put your foot in the door, your body can move in it. So don't be afraid to do that. What can you do to make it less painful? Be honest with yourself. It is historically known, women will wait to be completely qualified for every single item on the list before they'll apply for a role. Stop doing that to yourself. Be more like your brothers and just submit. Remember, if you're perfect and you have it all, why do I need to hire you? Are you going to grow? We know that. I love my guys. Y'all be faking on y'all resumes too. You haven't done this for 17 years. You're only 15. That's okay. Just go for it. Sometimes you just have to give yourself some grace to go for it, and just go for it. How many places should you apply? That's up to you. How much time do you have? How much capacity do you have? Because interviewing is exhausting. It is exhausting, especially if you're any of these big tech companies. They want to do loops. They want to do a loop for a whole day. You're talking to 6 people back to back. Pace yourself. I would say list out your priorities. These are my top 3. I'm going to do my top 3. And maybe you space those out because you really want to give them your best effort. What you don't want to do is take your top 3 choices and do all those interviews in one day. You're going to be exhausted. And then you're not even going to want to work. I wouldn't want to work. So really, truly pace yourself, but continue to put yourself out there. How many places should you apply? Sky's the limit. And how much time should you spend on this? I would say, so the way I did it was every time I ate a meal, I looked at a company. So when I would sit down to eat, I would look at a company, and I would, read on their mission statement, what they're doing, what type of technologies they're leveraging and where they're moving into the future. I went to Microsoft because Microsoft's mission aligned with what I wanted to do in life and with the Marine Corps. Like it just made sense for me. But it didn't stop me from interviewing with other companies who had sort of the same similar framework. But you get to determine your capacity. If you want to spend 3 hours a day, just make sure you allot the time and then walk away from it, because you can overwhelm yourself and then you get that analysis paralysis and you won't do anything. So you want to make sure that, hey, it's like studying for a big exam. You get 1 hour today. After that 1 hour, I'm walking away. That's it. Is it best to apply for your dream job company after interview at other places first, or best to dive in with the big ones first? Well, I guess that would, for me, it would depend on what you're prepared to answer. Look at the availability of that company, look at the availability of the other companies. If you really, really want that dream job, dream company, prioritize it. Because if you pick others and then you have to give this one minimal energy, but that's the one you want to give your maximum effort, then I would say make sure you prioritize that. Prioritization is very, very, very important. The technical interview process, what does it look like? I think it looks a little different for everyone depending on the role that you're going for. So as a technical PM, I focus a lot on strategy. I focus on organization. You want to talk agile, you want to talk lean, you want to talk coding. What do you want to do? Let's do it. I'm a polyglot in both languages and in coding languages. So it's kind of my superpower. But I will tell you that a lot of the times people want to know how you think. How do you collaborate? How do you bring others along? How do you get unstuck? And it's kind of like what, go back to Nadia. What Nadia said, if you just go quiet and just stare into the abyss. I'll never forget, I was in building 121 on the Redmond campus. I was reading Cracking the PM Code at the time. And I had a principal PM come up to me. He's like, he goes, you're about to interview? I was like, yeah, I saw another role that I think I want to interview for. And he's like, let me try something with you. He goes, if budget wasn't an issue and I gave you every resource in the world and I told you you needed to solve for traffic to make it to where there'd be no traffic getting from downtown Seattle to the campus, what would you do? And I paused and I asked, always ask the question to ensure that you're answering the question that they intend for you to answer and not the question you perceived it to be. So I was like, so are you asking me that if I had any resource, how would I, create a non-congested traffic situation between downtown Seattle and Redmond? He's like, yeah, what would you do? I said, and budget's not an issue? He's like, budget's not an issue. I was like, hold on, let me think about this. So let me pontificate on this because I'm a comedian. And I was like, oh, I got it. And he was like, all right, tell me about your plans. I said, I'm going to build a zip line. And he looked at me, he said, well, you have every resource and you can do anything, there's no budget. I was like, see, this is my understanding, is that you're telling me that you want me to get from point A to point B with no congestion. Now, if I take that money and that budget and I create, a fast lane or another freeway, that's going to cause congestion on the way. That's going to prolong my process. I'm still going to have traffic backed up. But when I think about a zip line, that can go up right now, not impact traffic, but it also ensures that only 1 to 2 people can be on the zip line at a time. It's never going to be backed up. I think I can do this. And he, we stared at each other for a long, he's like, you're going to go far. And I was just like, all right, talk it out. And if you get stuck, if you ever get stuck, make it a learning experience. Because if this could be your first role and you're like, you know what, I've never experienced that before. Can you explain it to me or give me an example? And they could give you an example and you could be like, you know what, one time when I was in camp, I did something similar. This is what I did. And talk through it. Always talk through it. Because one, that gets you engaged. You become the student. And nerds like to teach. We do. It's okay. We know we do. But when you can show that you can listen and be educated, and then you can make it relevant to you, that's a special skill, because a lot of people, you gotta, take the pride off and put it to the side. So that's just, it's a superpower. And I think everyone should learn to leverage the learning tool, because that piece is very important. What are key problem solving techniques to apply during the screening interview, technical and during whiteboard interviews? As someone who does not like whiteboard interviews, I will tell you, write it down. Write everything down. Whatever comes into your mind, write it down. And I promise you, at some point, it might actually start to make sense to you, because as you're writing it down, you're talking through it. You're talking through it. You're talking through it. You're talking through it. You might actually get your interviewer to start talking with you through it and be like, all right, okay, cool. This makes sense to me. And if they're asking questions and you can answer them, why? Because some people are visual, audio, visual learners. You need to see. I'm a super creative, so I love to draw everything out. I just don't like to whiteboard because I don't like people interrupting my creative process when I'm doing it. Like, stop talking to me. I'm working here. That's me. But you want to make sure that, listen, ask questions. It's problem solving is vital as long as you listen to understand, because it's really hard to solve a problem you don't understand. So always ask for clarity, seek clarity. But yeah, I think communicating effectively is the most important. Talk with people and don't talk at them. I've had people talk at me in an interview and it was very weird. And that's not conducive for a good conversation. So, and if you get nervous, say it. All right, I'm nervous. Give me 1 second. Reset, recenter, and keep it moving. How can I help my company recruit more diversity group of folks? The engineering team I'm currently in is 20+ men, mostly white, and I'm the only woman. Okay, I'm gonna tell you what I told a VP recently. I got the privilege to interview one of the VPs, and she said that sometimes she feels out of place because she's the only woman in a room with all men, and she's the only queer woman in a room with all men. And I just asked a very simple question. How long have you been in that room, and who have you invited in? Now, when you invite them in, well, one, you got to invite them in, right? And then two, you have to create the space for them to be allowed to be. Because if you don't, recruiting is never the problem, it's the retention. You can recruit all day, but if you can't retain the talent, the people, and the diversity, I mean, diversity is 2 left-handed people in a room of 50 right-handed. You have to be able to retain them though. So what happens? You stop putting them, on the inside when it's time to eat, put them on the outside so they can use that hand. But it's understanding what their diversity is and how to make them comfortable. Like, everyone should feel like they belong. So recruiting for diversity isn't the problem. It's retaining it. At what point would you say you know enough of a language to start applying for jobs? I mean, do we ever really master a language? Are we still, do you know every word in the English language? Or can you still read a book and find a word that you're like, what does this mean? I feel like once you're comfortable to make mistakes and be able to troubleshoot it, failing is half the battle. I have yet to meet a perfect coder. I know they're out there somewhere. Bless them. I'll never be that. But once you're comfortable with failing, then, and learning how to, all right, dig yourself out of your failure and being able to not get, full meltdown. Like, I've seen people just go ballistic over, and it's like, we could just work through that if you like. I'm here to help if you want. But you're just jump. Just jump. You do not have to be an expert. You don't have to be able to code forwards and backwards with your eyes closed. You don't. When you feel that you know enough to continue learning, there it is. If I know enough, like, all right, I got this. I'm not perfect, but I'm willing to work at it. And you make that prioritization, that allotting the time to work on your craft. I will tell you, I'm getting ready for a bodybuilding competition. Every night, no matter what, I take 20 minutes and I practice posing. I don't like it. I don't want to, but I need to do it to get better. Why? Because I want to win, right? Those type of things. So if you know that every day, because coders code. Code is code. And they code like this. They got their little hats down or their hoodies up. They're in their world. They're coding. When you get to the point where you're coding and you're like, I can do this, And even if I can't, I'm going to keep trying. That's when you apply. I've heard about inclusion and diversity, but how is ageism connected to this? Does inclusion include older folks? Realistically, all things being equal, what are the chances that a 50-year-old male will get hired through a traditional interview? You know what?
So real quick, I am recording all these questions if we want to share them for the whole group too. So, but
Oh, my bad. I was just reading them as they came in. I apologize.
no, that's okay because you've been giving really good answers. So I don't want to cut you off.
Okay, I'll answer this and then I'll stop. Ageism is real. And I will tell you that I just had a 50-plus-year-old woman who she's been a stay-at-home mom for the last 23 years, 18 plus years, but 23 total. And she is now a program manager. But when we were talking, she was like, I've never had a job outside of the home. I said, first of all, that's a job by itself. Don't discredit it. I said, well, tell me about, what you've been doing. And she had 8 kids. Why? I don't know. Could not be me, but bless her. She has 8 kids. And I said, okay. I said, well, tell me about your kids. Do any of them play sports? She's like, yes, all of them play sports. And I was like, of course they would. Why wouldn't they? Because kids are active. I said, all right. I was like, do they all play the same sport? She was like, no. I was like, it just gets better and better. I said, how do you keep track of everything? And she's like, oh, can I show you something? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And she shares her screen and she shows me this Excel spreadsheet, right? And it has all of her kids, all of their games, home, away, what uniforms, what colors they're wearing, who's on snack detail, because apparently that's a thing. Like, it just, what happens, what's the change management schedule if, a parent can't make it, someone gets a flat, who's going to bus the kids, move the kids? And I was like, I'm looking at this and I was like, you're program manager. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, this is a program. What happens if it rains? Then we do this and we do this at this location. Okay, that's called change management. And I just taught her the lingo. I taught her unexpected event. Like I taught her all the things that you learn as a program manager. Once you figure out the language, it just becomes a really good way to really translate your skills and what you're doing. At 50 plus, you can get hired through a traditional interview. I will say that you need to network. We're not like circling the ad in the newspaper anymore and calling the phone number to set up the original interview. You have to stay current to what's going on. So that means be active on LinkedIn, have conversations with people, invite people like for 10-minute coffee chats or whatever, do some informationals. But more and more I see teachers, leaving their professions of 26, 27 years as teachers, they're in their 50s coming over to tech. And it's just, wow. I mean, there's a space for everybody. So I wouldn't say to discount yourself. I think, and look, I'm always going to go back to, and you're a male. Y'all don't quit. Apply. Apply. Don't be afraid to apply. The ladies too, don't be afraid. To my non-binaries, don't be afraid. Like if they cannot take you at your 50, they didn't deserve you at your 40, 30, or 20 either. So apply. And resources, Nadia gave the resources. I was totally gonna say code and decode and cracking the PM code. Those are my two go-tos. If you're a veteran, then I have a whole different set of resources because there's so many phenomenal programs out there for veterans to transition into tech. Or a veteran spouse or a child of. But yeah, so that's me. I'm Aisha.
Awesome. And if you want to, Aisha, if you want to send me any of those resources, I can include them in the notes in the next couple of days.
I got you.
Excellent. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. And we're moving on to Samuel. You are ready to go, Samuel? Oh, I see you there.
Yeah,
There we
one
go.
second. I'm trying to figure out this whole Zoom thing. You know, we've been working from home for like the last 2 years, but I've never used Zoom. So, all right, I think there's a slideshow button there.
There
All
we
right.
go.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, indeed.
All right, cool. So I just want to get this disclaimer out. This presentation does not reflect T-Mobile. It's just my personal anecdotes. And you know what? Following up on the last two talks, it's going to be pretty hard. And so I think a lot of these are just going to be my personal anecdotes. I'm a person who's been in the industry for about 5 years now. So, all right, so a little bit about myself. My name's Samuel No. Born and raised in Hawaii. I came up to Seattle for college in 2010, and I've been here ever since. This is relevant because when I was growing up in Hawaii, tech was not very well. Tech even now down there is very, very not critical. You know, it's not something that people focus on. Whereas you come up here in Seattle, Silicon Valley, that's all people ever talk about, right? It's not something we ever focused on in high school. I didn't know what a software engineer was until, I met some friends up here who happen, you know, my social circle happens to be a bunch of people who play video games. And so it happened to be that a lot of them were going into computer science. And then The Social Network came out the year I graduated high school. And so I didn't watch that movie until I started college. It's like, oh, I didn't realize this existed. So for anyone who's in the North Seattle College Bachelor of Applied Science program, I graduated from that program in 2017. So 5 years now. So, and I happen to have been at T-Mobile for the last 5 years. I started off as a summer intern and I converted to full-time, and I've been there ever since. And so we're going to talk about opportunities here. And so if you looked at my slides earlier, I didn't have the screenshot here, but I thought it was really funny because I don't use Twitter at all. Well, actually, I have a Twitter. I just never use it. And so, you know, Nadia talked about people using Twitter as a way to get a job. And honestly, I thought, you know, I was thinking to myself, oh yeah, I forgot people do that. And then I remembered, because, you know, I still play StarCraft 2. That's a pretty old game now, but I remember hearing about a former StarCraft 2 pro he happened to be looking for a software engineering internship, and the CEO of Shopify ended up reaching out to him so Shopify actually happens to be a very big sponsor of StarCraft 2 tournaments. And so the CEO of Shopify happens to just really like StarCraft 2. He's followed it for a long time. And so he happened to, you know, reach out to Select, and Select got that internship, and I'm pretty sure he's still at Shopify now, just as a regular software engineer. So there's definitely a lot of non-traditional routes when you're looking for jobs, but for the most part, you know, for me, I was just, you know, I'm just some dude, right? And so I just went through applying to company websites, Indeed.com, Glassdoor.com. I didn't go through LinkedIn.com. I have a LinkedIn, but I just didn't use it at the time. I use LinkedIn more for social networking, which I don't do too much of. Not on LinkedIn. So I know everyone else is saying use LinkedIn a lot. I think that's good advice. This is not something, you know, I'm particularly fond of. So, but that said, so applying directly through company websites, generally, so I can give you an example. For T-Mobile, you would just go to the careers page, you type in software engineer, and then you would find something within your area. T-Mobile happens to have headquarters in Bellevue. They happen to have other headquarter locations in Dallas, Fort Worth area, Atlanta. And so you have to think about when you're hiring directly or applying directly through a company, you have to remember, am I going to want to relocate? All these kinds of questions come up, and you're going to have to really think about it, right? Otherwise, you know, in my in my case, I just happened to go through the rapid fire route. And so I sent out my application to probably 200 places in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And I think I must have had 2 interviews out of those 200, and I got 1 offer. So, it's a numbers game when you're starting out. Now that I'm 5 years into my career, I do get recruiters emailing me all the time through my personal email and somehow through my work email, which is particularly odd, but it does happen. And I actually do get a lot of people through my LinkedIn as well. So LinkedIn is a very valuable resource. Other than that, local hacker spaces, hackathons are a great way to meet people, a great way to be at a company. I know T-Mobile started doing hackathons fairly recently. And so it's just a good way to get used to a competition environment while being able to network with people that are already in the industry, right? And so other than that, say you're still a student, school networking via career fairs happen to be a very good option. I've worked with Steve a lot when I was looking for jobs. And so I remember when I was in school, we had a talk with an Amazon person, an Amazon recruiter and a software engineer. He happened to go through a talk similar to this, actually. He actually went over the technical interview. And then they happened to have at that specific talk a direct route into Amazon did three types of interviews at that time. And so you go through the initial screening, and then there's the coding assessment, and then on-site. And so when we were at that event, we were able to bypass the initial screening. And so we're able to go to I went through the coding assessment. And so that's a very valuable resource there. North Seattle isn't as big as something like UW. UW's huge, right? And I know plenty of my friends all went to UW CS, and they just ended up getting most of them ended up just getting their jobs through career fair and working with recruiters directly during those career fairs. So those are very important resources. And otherwise, just send out your resume. For me, I mentioned it earlier, I happen to be really into video games. And so a lot of my friends, I met through just local events, I played Street Fighter. So, I just met them playing Street Fighter. And I live in Seattle, and, it happens to be that almost every single person I meet these days, I ask them what their job is, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm a software engineer. At this point, I just automatically assume that everyone's a software engineer, and then we go from there, right? It's really interesting talking to people in Seattle versus, somewhere like Hawaii. It's different. And so I want to talk a little bit about FANG. And if you're not familiar with FANG, it's the acronym I think Jim Cramer came up with, which refers to Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Facebook is now Meta, and I want to say it might be Mang now. I don't know what the tech community has come up with yet, so I'm just gonna refer to it as FANG from here out. So one thing to know about the interview process is that they can vary very, very wildly. I'm pretty sure I can't speak. I did an interview at Amazon. I went through the initial screening. I probably can't talk about the actual interview process because I don't know if I'm still under NDA on that one, but I can say that process was so much more different than what I went through at T-Mobile and just other companies. Even the technical interview process can be really different. A lot of places will do whiteboarding. We happen to be in a pandemic, and so a lot of the interview processes are now just done via computer. And so we'll talk about a little more when we get into the technical interview section. But a lot of advice back then was to be able to do your whiteboarding problems on pencil and paper. That's a good way to start. Some companies don't even do technical interviews. There's actually a lot of resources out there that gives you a list of companies that don't do technical interviews. And so that's just something to keep in mind if you don't actually want to go through that. There's a lot of different companies out there, right? A lot of people in this industry really focus on these big Silicon Valley companies, FANG, of course. And this acronym should actually be really long now because there's a lot of tech unicorns out there. Reddit happens to actually be one of them. There's Uber, Shopify, there's just so many different companies. Now, in the industry itself, if you happen to want to go to a FANG company for prestige, pay, that's definitely something to aim for, right? Something to strive for. But at the same time, you got to remember that there's also a lot of different companies out there, and maybe one of the FANG companies might not be something that fits your needs. We've all heard horror stories about these different big companies with work-life balance issues, right? And so for me personally, I'm absolutely willing to take a lower salary if it means that I don't have to take my work at home, right? That's a big thing to think about when you're applying to these companies. And so Silicon Valley in particular, there's a lot of startups out there, a lot of young people. And so they all happen to be really gung-ho about shipping out the next product. I can say for me personally, that's not quite what I want. I'm more of a stability kind of guy, right? And so all these things are really good to think about. If you're curious about the pay in these companies, though, there's a good website called levels.fyi. Great resource in order to compare salaries. If you happen to be further in your career, you can compare, I'm currently a software engineer, one level above a entry level. And so I can take a look at someone with 5 years of experience at a company like Microsoft or Amazon, see what the different pay is, make sure I'm being paid what I want to, right? So going on, we're going to talk about resume, because for a lot of people, this is going to be the first thing that a company will ever see from you. And so it's pretty wordy here. That's why the slides will be available. But it's a pretty good checklist here. You want to keep your resume to one page, unless you happen to have 10 plus years of experience. And even then, you can probably condense that down to quite a bit. I know for me, I have a one-page resume. I rarely see any resumes past one page, even with people who've been in the industry for 15 years. I think the 2+ page resume is honestly a lot rarer than you think, because these are people who are probably been in the industry for 20 years and say maybe they invented something, right? The guy who invented PowerShell is probably going to have a longer resume than someone with 5 years of experience. Now, I'm pretty sure the guy who invented PowerShell still works at Microsoft. So he'll have a lot of projects down, probably just be at one company, but that's a whole different thing. So on your resume, for software engineers in particular, and because I don't have any experience with the other types of jobs in the tech industry, project management, QA, I'm not entirely familiar with that. I can speak for software engineers. You want to tailor your resume towards the software development. And so what that means is, if you have your work experience relevant towards the software engineering field, you want that on there. You don't want to put on, so for example, I used to work at Katzenberger. If you're local to Seattle, I used to work at Katzenberger. I didn't put that on my resume because, well, I used that space to create more space for my project section. So I focused heavily on my project section when I was sending out my resume. I didn't have any work experience. I didn't have an internship before I got my first internship. And so I had to use a lot of space. I basically had to fill up space, right? And so I used a lot of projects I worked in school. I had a capstone, which happened to be uh, pretty relevant. I did a full stack website. I built the database. I had a REST API in the back end. I built the front end Angular, and that was a really good talking point for me during my interviews because I was able to explain what I did, and that that was probably the reason why I have my current job because the team I happen to be working on were looking for a REST API engineer, and I happen to have on my first line item built website REST API blah blah blah. So I don't actually remember the line item. It's been a little too long. So you want to cut the fluff. This includes mostly any, you don't want to have too much non-relevant information in particular for software engineering. Like I said earlier, I do have a plethora of work experience, and it's woefully not going to really help me out there. It's good to have something on there. For instance, I did have that I was a IT tech support at North Seattle, and so I put that down. But other than that, I didn't bother putting in any extra details there because I wanted to focus on the software engineering. You want to make sure that when you have you're sending your resume out, people know that you can actually code, right? And without actually seeing someone code, it's really hard to get a grasp of that. Nadia said first on the top, you want to have a list of your skills. That's really, really good to have. My skill list is probably 3 lines long. It's pretty long. Admittedly, it can probably be cut down, but I happen to have friends at Indeed.com, who is a giant recruiting website, and my friend actually happened to work on the filtering method for the application process. And yeah, what he says is keywords are good. So outside of that, boring is good. You don't really want to have a resume with pictures on them. Good old black and white text. As far as fonts go, you probably want Arial or something. Don't put Comic Sans. Real basic stuff. Just keep it professional, right? And the final point I want to go on the resume is you want to be able to describe your projects or your actual line items in your work experience, right? And so Steve actually taught me this. Use the STAR method, which I forgot what it stands for. Steve can probably help you out with that.
Situation, task, action, result. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to put it on the slide, but I completely forgot. But you can see in this example here.
Just a real
wrote
quick
code in HTML, JavaScript, CSS, website application versus developed a single page front end application using JavaScript, HTML, CSS to optimize the responsiveness, which increased the conversion rate from 2% to 7%. So you can see that the 2 to 7%, it's hard to quantify how much impact something has had, but you want to have that I already forgot what the R stands for, but you'll want to have that in your actual line item. Result. Thank you, Steve. You see, Steve's a good guy, man. He helps me out. So if you can tell the difference between this line item, right? Wrote code, that doesn't really tell me anything about, well, what does your application do? It's just you wrote code. Okay, great. Well, a single page front end application, that kind of tells you, okay, well, that's a website. And yeah, it's because it's single page application, it's going to increase responsiveness, and increased responsiveness leads to better customer retention, right? They're going to be using your application more versus, I don't know what a website application in code is. It can be anything, right? And that doesn't tell me anything about your knowledge in programming. It really doesn't, because anything could be an HTML website. So let's go on a little bit. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the technical interview prep. And so Nadia pretty thoroughly went over this, and so I don't have too much to add here. but you definitely want to be able to discuss your thought process throughout the interview. Now, back in the days of whiteboarding, when you're writing down things, you would talk to your interview, you'd ask them questions, can I use, would this be a good way to do this? And the interviewer will guide you throughout this if you're going off the wrong path, right? And so that's why you want to be able to discuss your thought process. You also don't want to, if you're silent throughout the interview, not only is the technical interview supposed to be gauging your technical prowess, it also gives them an idea of how you communicate, right, to your team. And I didn't go over behavioral interview portion, but that's actually a very, very important portion of the software engineering process. There's an entire subset of skills called soft skills, which, it's not really talked about too much, but it's a very, very important aspect. I'm not going to get too much into soft skills now, but being said, you want to be able to articulate yourself throughout the interview process. Now, with that said, technical interviewing prep, I use LeetCode, and it's a very popular website now. I happen to use a set of 75 questions called the Blind 75, which I haven't actually gone through all 75 questions yet, but it's a list of questions that are really good to go over because it goes over various skill sets, and there's so many different techniques in software engineering. It goes from merge sorts to binary trees, being able to traverse a binary tree, being able to sort something, going through a maze. There's so many different plethora of things. There's string manipulation. And so Blind 75 will really, by the time you get through it, I don't want to say you'll be ready, but you should be able to, by the end of it, be able to kind of just go to a random question, be like, okay, yeah, I can start doing this, right? LeetCode happens to go by an easy, medium, hard. From what I've heard from other companies, easy and mediums are the go-tos. Hard is very rare, and I mean very rare. I have multiple friends at Indeed who do technical interview questions, and they never give out hards, right? So I've heard a lot of people when they prep for LeetCode, they'll go through a lot of easies. Once they can get through easies, say they start a question, finish it within, 20 minutes. That's when they'll start grinding out the mediums. Now, for me, I have weaker skill sets in certain areas, and so I like to focus on that before I really try to, just go through the entire list of things. That's why it's taken me a little while to get through Blind 75. That end, I'm not really looking for. I'm trying to keep my skills sharp, but at the same time, LeetCode is one of those things where, for the most part, you probably won't be using a lot of these algorithmic problems ever again. I've never had to code my own merge sort in the actual field, but I've had to use, say I've had to merge or sort out an array before I had to use it, right? And so I would use the built-in library before I would code up something. But LeetCode, doing LeetCode, it's pretty synonymous with the software engineering field. And well, it happens to be a way to filter out people who may not be ready for a software engineering job, right? And it's such a high paying field that this is kind of the general consensus of companies these days. Now, like I said earlier, there are several companies that hire without the technical interview, but those are definitely rare. So brushing up on LeetCode. Oh yeah.
Sorry, just watching our time here.
Oh yeah, sorry.
You ready to wrap up?
I am. This is actually my last slide.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Samuel. You can wrap things. We'll hand things off to Giselle. And there we go.
Hi. Can you all see me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'll get started. So I'm Giselle. I'm a data science manager at Twitter right now. And previously I was at Amazon and Lyft. So I do come from a somewhat non-traditional background. I got my PhD in biology and then kind of like transitioned to tech when I realized I didn't want to go into academia. And my first job was at like a research scientist at Amazon. So that's kind of like a little background about me. And then I've been working at kind of like the tech industry for about 6 years at this point. So hopefully, you know, like having worked at a few different places and at different roles, I can give you guys the perspective from both kind of like what it is to be on one side and then also like as a hiring manager. So I think like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my understanding is that most folks here are kind of like, you know, interviewing and kind of like focusing on like finding their first job in tech, right? So I'm not gonna lie, I think, you know, persistence has been the key thing that I kind of like learned during that phase of my career, right? Like, I'm not gonna lie, it is a grind, like it is the hardest at this stage of your career, right? Like your first job going from 0 to 1 and actually kind of like getting some real tech experience under your belt. I think that is like something that is like a monumental achievement. From there on, like it took me like 6 months to find my first tech job with Amazon, right? But then from onwards, like it just got so much easier because you're kind of like building experience and credibility, you're learning on the job. So, you know, the script kind of like flips, the recruiters come find you. And like, you know, from then onwards, everything become like so much easier. You have a lot more kind of like negotiation power, right? So I think like one of the points I really wanted to echo, especially with what the previous speaker was saying, was just like, you know, it is like a numbers game, right? When you are looking for your first job. So I think kind of like, you know, figure out, so there are kind of like things that could help you with your search, right? Number one being really clear about what the role you want is, right? There's some kind of like really coarse screens about like different tech roles. You have like software engineers, maybe you have like TPMs, product management, you have data scientists, right? But like if you look inside all of these kind of like different career tracks, you can actually really further differentiate them. So I've always been on the data science track, so I'll kind of like focus on that, right? Like within data science, there's a couple of different archetypes, right? That requires like very different levels of kind of like technical skills, technical skills. Let's focus on that. So I would say like the 3 archetypes that kind of like stand out to me, and like, you know, different companies will target like different archetypes, right? And often it's a waste of your time to go on these interviews when, you know, there's a fundamental mismatch in expectations. So I would say on like one end of the spectrum, you have more kind of like, you know, the business analysts, you'll see them called like data analysts, business intelligence engineers. And these roles are really heavily focused on kind of like, you know, dashboarding, self-service analytics, and then really digging into like user insights, right? For example, like retention analysis, funnel analysis, user segmentation, so on and so forth. In the middle, you have kind of like more of the research scientists, data scientists, and really data scientist is like the most muddied like role title right now. So here you'll find like a mixture of people doing, like decision science, right? Like statistics, like experimentation, or like economists who really focus on like observational causal inference and policy evaluation. But then you'll also find folks who are doing kind of like operations research, maybe they're trying to like optimize kind of like ride matching or like supply chain. You'll also find like some people who are doing like ML, right? And ML is kind of like where it really intersects into like the next kind of like archetypes, right? So much, and there, you know, over the years, I feel like the role like applied science has been more and more of like a differentiated title from like data science, right? So applied science usually implies like in addition to doing a lot of offline analysis, which you can do in just like SQL or kind of like in your notebook, right? You're also actually putting models in production. Those models can be machine learning models, they can be like optimization models, but it implies some sort of like interaction with like the underlying infrastructure, right? So those are kind of like the 3 different archetypes. Recruiters, so one of the key things to remember in your kind of like job search process is that like you have to really take ownership of like, okay, here's what I want to do, here's what my skills are best suited for, because the recruiter is not going to know. and like, you know, some machine screening your resume, they're not going to be able to achieve that level of like fine grained understanding, right? So here, I think, you know, being really proactive about like, one, having the right keywords in your resume to really kind of like help us stand out and kind of like meet these archetypes. And the other thing is like, you know, a lot of our speakers have also really emphasized like networking, right? And I'll say that again. I think that's critically important to kind of like getting a high response rate, right? I think, you know, you can apply to a number of jobs, and many of the times, like your resume does kind of like get lost at sea, right? For example, I have a few job postings for my team right now, and we probably get like hundreds of resumes. It is really hard for a recruiter or like a hiring manager to screen through all that kind of like pile and differentiate, okay, what is signal versus what is noise, right? So what I really encourage you guys to do is kind of like, you know, one, if you're on LinkedIn, and I do use LinkedIn myself as kind of the primary tool here, is like, okay, if you see like, you know, hiring managers who have like the big letters hiring next to their names, kind of like try to figure out what their team is doing and then reach out to them, right? Usually, the candidates that kind of like message me directly have gotten like much better luck than probably somebody who just kind of like, you know, check their resume into the system. And, you know, because we get so many, a lot of times they do just kind of like sit there, right? So I think that is something to keep in mind of. And I do want to emphasize again, like the importance of like just being really persistent and not kind of like getting demoralized by the process. It is very, very demoralizing when you hand out like so many resumes, you apply to so many jobs, but you get very little in return, right? Well, hopefully it's not like this for you guys, but it was like that for me at first anyways. The other thing to remind yourself of is that also like this may also apply in your networking efforts, like because you're really new, you're kind of like, you know, and most managers, right, they do prefer like senior candidates with experience that are kind of like take less coaching and ramp on. Like, you know, a lot of these kind of like networking efforts, they may also kind of like fall short, right, of your expectations. So I think the key thing here is just kind of like be really clear about what you want, sticking with that, communicate that really clearly to the recruiters, don't waste your time. And then also like try to proactively reach out to the managers, right? And then just like, don't lose heart. Like it is a grind, it is a long process. But you just need one job to get you started. So that's kind of like the thing I held on to at first. So hopefully, you know, that works for you guys too. So I think, you know, the next thing I really want to talk about is probably just like studying for these interviews, right? So we talked about different archetypes or data science, and there are kind of like different implications for how you kind of like interview, how they're interviewed, right? For example, with the first archetype, where it's really like an analytics role, right? It's like under the titles of like data analysts, business intelligence engineers. So this, like the focus here is very much on kind of like SQL, right? Like SQL, it's a very formulaic language. It's really, really easy. I knew NoSQL in my first job, but like they had me go through like a SQL screen and I still passed. That is like how easy it is. It is very formulaic. And there are a lot of kind of like places where you can actually kind of like practice SQL, right? There's like an interviewquery.com. Don't quote me on that, Steve. I will send you the actual link after this. But there's a lot of like resources that you can get, right? So there's a lot to do there. And then in the middle, I would say this is kind of like where you probably, people are looking for like a professional degree, or that kind of like, you know, you have to kind of like think about how to leverage your previous experience, right? Because like now we're kind of like getting into that middle territory where a lot of it is around like decision support and policy evaluation, where it's really like statistics and like economics, right? So here, I think to really help yourselves, I think knowing the basics of experimentation, I think is really important. So if you have done experimentations in other like fields of science or like, you know, on your jobs, I think that's really valuable experience to highlight. The last one is machine learning. So this is not an experience that's kind of like particularly easy to get, although there's some like kind of like ways around this, right? There are all of these kind of like programs nowadays to essentially, sorry, did someone say something?
I don't think purposefully.
Okay, cool. Then I will continue. Machine learning. So I think like most data scientist jobs, like at least a couple of years back, right? It was always kind of like a mixture of like, oh, we want a little bit of everything, right? The field is getting really, it's trending towards like more specialization at this point. But like, you know, in more startup kind of like environments, they do kind of like ask for more of a generalist talent, right? So it doesn't hurt to know a little bit of machine learning. There's a lot of kind of like, you know, interesting books like and like courses that you could take on that, like Andrew Ng's course being one of like the most famous ones. And you know, there are kind of like places like Kaggle where you can kind of like see what other people are doing, and then also kind of like practice with real data sets yourselves, right? If you work with data on a regular basis, like it could be like a research project you're doing in school or kind of like on the job. They're kind of like creative ways to kind of like use all of these techniques, right? And the goal here is really just that, like, okay, like you are familiar enough with these techniques to actually kind of like, okay, walk through the nuances of like applying them during the interview. Like, what do you do with missing data? What do you do when there's kind of like data corruption or kind of adversarial interactions between like the model and like the actual users, right? Okay, let me check my notes, Steve. So that's a little bit on the different archetypes, right? So like knowing what you want, studying for kind of like the interviews that people target at these different archetypes. And the other thing is like, you know, interview around, right? Like, you know, it doesn't hurt to get practice. Like you'll maybe like broadcast your resume out there and maybe like, you know, 5 or 6 companies will respond. You're not going to get all of those offers and you don't need all of those offers, right? So I actually do think, at least what I do is like, I'll stack the ones I'm least interested in at first. And then I'll kind of like study, I'll use those to kind of like, iterate, like, I'll use those as kind of like feedback for myself. It's like, okay, I need to study a little bit more on this topic, or like I could have answered that behavioral question a little bit better, right? And then I do tend to kind of like put the ones I'm really interested in, like, backloaded, so that like by the time I'm in like prime condition to like pass that screen. Yeah. So when you get to the actual interview, and again, you know, if this is kind of like you hopping from your first job to your second job to your third job, and so on and so forth, there's way less pressure, right? But for the first one, it can be really, really intimidating. So I think like one, going through those kind of like practice rounds, and you can also kind of like pay for practice with like interview.io. It really helps you kind of like get feedback and really calms your nerves, right? Because by the time you get to the actual thing, everything's kind of like formulaic, you know what to expect. When you get to the actual interview, I think one thing that would really help you is like, you know, talk to the recruiter. The recruiter is your friend. They're invested and incentivized to kind of like help you get in, right? So they can like best brief you on like what interviews are looking for, and like, you know, what the different rounds are about, right? Like, you know, different companies do have like different focuses and on their interviews, and they do have like different standards. I'll just be honest with you guys. Like, for example, I know like Facebook really optimizes for speed, right? So if you're doing their coding interview, they want you to give them the optimal solution like right now, and they'll go through like 3 different questions in one interview. That can be very stressful. But if you know what to expect, you know, that is hopefully calms you down a little bit. The thing to keep in mind is that there are usually kind of like 2 different decisions that are made during like the interview process, right? Like one is the hiring decision. Like, do we want this person? Do we want you in this company? The other decision is like, okay, we want this person, but like conditional on that, do we want them as like a senior data scientist, a data scientist 2, or a data scientist 1, right? And so, you know, your interviewer is simultaneously trying to gather information to inform both of those decisions there. Usually there's some like basic bar. If you hit it, they'll kind of like say, oh, okay, this person is legit. We'll give them an offer. But like a lot of the questions are designed to assess people on a spectrum of experience, right? So Like we'll start with something really easy and then think about, okay, but what happens if you're under this constraint? Or like, okay, now we understand what's going on, in that situation. What about this other thing, right? So the questions increasingly get more complex as you progress throughout the interview. That is just good to kind of like keep on your minds, so that like, okay, if you feel like at some point in your interview, you don't really know the answer anymore, don't freak out about that. I mean, the questions are designed to do that. Okay, what else do I have? Okay, and I think the other thing is communication, especially kind of like clarifying questions. What I've discovered, like your rapport with the interviewer does matter. Oh, I have some direct messages, which I will respond to in a little bit. Your rapport with the interviewer does matter, right? Like, like it is a technical interview, but like think of your interviewer as like your coworker, right? And maybe like this person is like a peer or like a mentor to you, and they have like more like it's your first day on the job and they just have like more context than you do, right? So to some extent, they're kind of like there to help you solve the problem if you ask the right questions. So usually, try to get a conversation going, make sure there's some back and forth. The other goal here is always to kind of like let the interviewer know like where you are with the problem, right? Okay, here's what I'm thinking. Let them know that you're actually making progress. And not just kind of like, doodling around. Okay, so I think maybe I'll take a second to talk about the question in the chat. Any general tips to someone who's on a software dev path in school who wants to transform more towards the data field, i.e. data analytics? Well, I think that you're in a pretty good position to do that. Data science, we still work with code, right? So I think, because you have that basics down solid and good for you, I think it's going to be a relatively easy path for you to transition into some field of data science, right? I think we talked about 3 different archetypes. The first archetype, data analytics, usually comes in with a little bit of kind of like ETL and like, data engineering responsibilities. So here, if you have a software background, you're really actually at a very strong advantage here. The same with kind of like on the other side of the spectrum, where it's like applied science, machine learning engineers, like those are the roles where you kind of like really work with the underlying infrastructure, right? So when you do have that software engineering background, like the backend really well and how to set kind of like different data flows up, you're also at advantage there. I would say in the middle, like where it's really heavy on statistics or kind of like economics, where it's really like, okay, you really have to understand the robustness of these models and how you kind of like formulate them. I think that is probably the hardest one to kind of like break into. And I would say there, I would consider like, just taking classes.
All right. Thank you so much, Giselle. I'm going to hand things over to Dan. I'm also going to note that we are going to probably run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the unanswered questions that if we run out of time after Dan, and I'm going to send them out to our speakers and then I'm going to gather all the answers together and put them in a Google Doc or something to share with everybody. So I want to make sure we do get those questions answered. So, all right.
Cool.
Thank you for jumping in, Dan.
Yeah, I'm kind of jumping in because I know that we're running out of time, and I do want to give some people some time at the end to ask them some questions. So I'm actually going to run through mine super quick so that people, because ultimately, like a lot of the things that some of the other people already said are super valuable. So, and just for sake of not repeating, I'm just going to go through mine super quick. I'm going to try to add a couple of extra things in there that hopefully that'll stay with you. And you can take all the conversation that we've been having with all the other 4 people and myself, and hopefully that's going to be a really good little package of information for you for when you go out and you look for jobs and interview for jobs. Anyways, I'm gonna try and keep this for 5 minutes. You can time me. Let's try for the best. Real quick, I'm just gonna go through real quick to who I am. My name is Dan Jimenez. I work currently with Slalom Consulting. I've been at Slalom for 7 years. Currently at Slalom Consulting, I'm a senior consultant, people leader, and ERG co-lead. Part of my job entails, aside from being co-lead for an ERG, is I also am part of the interview process of new candidates for the Modern UI team. I'm very involved with recruiting for Latinx candidates into slalom and retention of Latinx candidates in slalom. So I have a very fair amount of experience as an interviewee and as an interviewer. Okay, I won't go through my skills. I will go through all the other stuff because again, we're trying to save some time. Anyways, finding a job. The way that I approach this before I even start this, the way that I approach this is basically I looked at it, but all that I can really tell you is based on my experience and kind of how I relate looking for jobs and interviewing for jobs into my everyday life, like how I relate it into my everyday life. Anyways, so first question is how to find technical roles. I ranked what I think is the most best to the least best, saying that the last one at the bottom is not to say that that's not a good way to find a job. It's definitely still a good way to find the job. I just think that there's some other ones that are a little bit better than that. Okay. So going down the list real quick, recommendation, obviously, like if somebody recommends you for a position, usually it's because they know you, it's because they think that you're going to be a really good fit for that position. And so being able to find a job because somebody recommended you for that role is going to be a decent opportunity for you to be able to land an interview for that company. Tech groups like this one, Alpha, SHIP, those are college groups, college tech groups. You can also go to other kinds of tech groups that are out there, like in meetups, like in, again, I'm trying to think super quick, like code jams, and pretty much any kind of tech group where you have to socialize with people and you have to kind of show your skills a little bit, or at least talk about your skills. That's going to be a really good opportunity for you to be able to showcase who you are, showcase what your abilities are, and talk to people to tell them that you're interested in roles that may be in a company that they're working at. Career fairs are a really good opportunity to find jobs because usually you have an opportunity to talk to somebody from the company about the company. Social media is also a really good one. I know some people already mentioned it. I can tell you from my personal experience, I get really involved with the gaming group, especially the local Seattle Indies gaming group. I don't do any of the indie gaming, sadly, because right now I'm in consulting and I love my job, so I'm not looking into moving there quite yet. But eventually, at some point in my life, I want to do that. So I'm already trying to get involved there. And one of the things that I can definitely tell you is that a lot of the times, like especially like I see Bungie, for example, that they're always posting all of their job openings on Twitter. LinkedIn is also a really good resource. So definitely use your social media to be able to connect with people that are from like different companies and seeing like where there might be a possibility of a new role coming up that could be your dream job. Job postings on the company side is a pretty reliable source, although sometimes they do tend to be a little bit outdated. Job posting on job search engines is also a good source, although again, can also run the risk of being outdated, but still a good source. And then recruitment firms are basically external recruiters or outsourced recruiters. I like them. I think my only concern with them is that there tend to be a lot of independent recruiters who are more concerned about trying to staff people into a role and not really looking into asking the question, is this the right fit for this person? So that's why I always have a little bit of more like a difficult experience myself with external recruiters, but that's not to say that they're not a good, valuable resource. Because ultimately, like any kind of opportunity that can come your way is a good opportunity, that especially if you're just starting in your career and you're just trying to get your foot in the door anywhere. Okay, how does one do networking? Based on the previous ranking, you can safely assume that networking will be one of the highest impacting efforts that you will do to land a great job, at least in my opinion. Some people can easily approach and present themselves, others not so much. Try to understand what your best way of meeting people is and approach networking that way. So for example, like even though I do these kinds of presentations and even though I am a leader in slalom consulting, I still have a little bit of trouble with just approaching people out cold and being like, hi, my name is Dan, I do this. Like, because sometimes I'm like, what if this guy's busy? Like, I don't want to bother this person or whatever. And so if you're the kind of person that's kind of like that and you prefer to have more things to be more organic in the way that you meet people, look at, again, like I said before, look at code jams, look at places where you're forced to talking to people, like in a career fair where you like, there's an open opportunity to actually talking to somebody about a position, about a job. Look at try to figure out first what works for you, and then approach looking for job hunting that way. Learn about self-promotion, to put it in the right mindset and learn about your strengths as part of it, as part of your work of your elevator pitch. In other words, know yourself. One of the things that we talk about a lot, especially we talk about with SHIP and Alpha, which are again the student groups, the student tech groups that we have partnership with, is that importance of knowing how to do your own self-promotion. Right. And it's a whole process. It's a whole mindset change that you have to know, where like you have to journal like all the efforts that you've done. You have to know really what your skills are. And then once you know how to do that self-promotion, then you can work on doing your elevator pitch, where you can talk to somebody for like and tell them like who you are in like a 30-second elevator pitch. And then from that point, that they know who you are, and you can like give out a card or give out some sort of like contact info that they can then consider you for a position later on. If in person, like I said earlier, if in person, always carry a business card. If digital, always follow up with thank you notes or questions. If a lead fizzles out, do not take it personal. Most of the time people are just busy and may not have the bandwidth at that time. But I think as Aisha was saying earlier, like people want to help for the most part. People really do want to help. They want to go out there and they're like, hey, if you were looking for a position, like if you approach somebody like, hey, I want to work for Microsoft. Most of the time, like somebody's like, okay, let's see how we can make that happen. Let me talk to me about yourself and stuff like that. But if the fizzles out, don't take it personal. Most of the time, it's just something that the person might be like super busy with their life or whatever. It's not about you. What should one do before applying or meeting someone from a company? First off, and this is for me very important, do your homework. Research the company. What do they do? What's their target audience? Are they local, national, international? Think of some of the questions you want to ask specific to the company's work. For example, what's their year-by-year rate of growth? How does their app service differ from others in the market? When you talk to a recruiter from a company, they should be able to at least have a conversation and answer some of these questions. Think about these questions that you want to ask to this company. Do the research, because the more that you know about the research and the more that you know about the company, and the more that you can actually have a conversation with this person about the company, it's the better impression that you're going to give. It's the more interest that you are going to have for that role, and the more successful that you're going to be in order to be able to get an interview, because ultimately that's what you want. A good candidate is one that is not only interested on the work, but interested in the company as well. If you're genuinely interested, it'll show in your interactions with recruiters, which then will translate in your work and interactions with managers and stakeholders, and will make you more likely to succeed. Now, let's talk a little bit about the application and screening process. And I'm going to start by saying that applying for jobs is painful and time consuming. If there's anything that you've taken from what all the other people have saying, yes, it is painful and time consuming, but the time that you put in my opinion, will increase your chances. For me, always write a cover letter, mostly because I think, who was it? Nadia was the one that mentioned this, that some of the bigger companies will have that automatic screening. And what they're looking for is they're looking for those keywords. One of the good ways that you can put in those keywords specifically is in the cover letter. You can also do it in the resume, but if you have it in the cover letter, that's also a good way to just kind of get that mechanical side out of the way. And one of the other ways, and also I think Nadia was the one that said this, is have that like standard that you can then customize. Definitely started with like, you know what, I'm not going to go through how she explained it. I think she did the best way of explaining it. So just remember that, go to the recording, read that, listen to that part, do that. If possible, summarize your resume to a one-pager. Not a requirement. It's just easier for the recruiter to be able to look at your skills and look at your resume and then make a decision real quickly from that. It's much easier for them. But again, not a requirement. If you have a lot of skills that you feel that are relevant for the position that you're applying for, okay, then put them in and put them in 2 pages. It should be fine for the most part. Apply to as many places as possible, in my opinion. As long as you're interested in the position, apply to it. Even if it's 2 job posts in the same company, Just change your resume to cater for that job and for the other job. Apply even if you don't fulfill all the requirements for the job posting. A lot of times for companies, they're not looking for the ideal candidate. They're just looking for somebody who can do the work, or sometimes somebody who can come in. They know that he'll be able to learn the ropes fairly quickly and then run, right? Sometimes sometimes companies need somebody who can be effective day one. You don't have knowledge of what that's going to look like. So the best way is just, if you don't fulfill the requirements, or if you feel like half of the requirements, like let's say that the first technology they put there is Java, and you're like, I'm fairly good on Java, but then they say JavaScript, and you're like, I'm not that great at JavaScript. Apply, because it could be that they'll give you the opportunity to be able to extend your JavaScript skills at the job. Depending on your job search urgency, set a goal to apply to X amount of jobs per week. This is just a recommendation in regards to you to not go crazy about applying for jobs. If you, let's say, for example, that you don't currently have a job, you're about to go into the job market, it basically means that applying for jobs is going to feel like a full-time job. Trust me. Just set up like a weekly goal of saying, I'm going to apply for X amount of jobs for this week. The key is consistency. I like to look at it as like the Brazil team soccer method, which is the Brazilian soccer team. One of the reasons why they're really good is because historically, the way that they approach soccer is by having a great offense, which means that they're shooting constantly. They're constantly shooting. They're constantly trying to hit goal. Even if it looks like the kick is not going to go in the goal, they still do it anyways. It doesn't matter. They just shoot and shoot and shoot, because eventually one of them is going to be a goal. Now, real quick about let's talk real quick about the technical interview. What is it? Let me move this because I have my notes over here. Thank you. The technical interview basically is to test your knowledge in regards to development. Every company does it different. Some companies can go really in depth in knowledge in the language of framework, because they might need somebody who can jump in and perform day one. Others might be more lax and just expect you to know the generalist idea of a programming language or framework, and expect you to pick up more knowledge as you work with the company. To give you a really quick example, I know some of the other people have talked about their experience and what they've seen in regards to the tech interview. At least the way that we do it is we will have somebody that will be like one of the principal delivery consultants, which is usually somebody who is very, very experienced in a certain technology, and we'll have them interview with a candidate, and we'll look at their list of projects and work, and we'll have them talk us through that technology. As they're talking through that technology, and they'll show us code, and they'll show us like the end result and the application, usually the principal delivery consultant, because of his expertise, will be able to follow up with technology questions. Then from that, the tech lead has a pretty decent range, or pretty good range actually, in my opinion, of like how capable the person is in regards to the technology that we're looking to fulfill. And as you just heard, I mean, it's very different from different companies. I've had experiences in interviews where like they'll ask me basic technology concepts, like what's a server farm or what's a hash table, just with the objective to stump me. I personally don't find those questions very helpful, but again, I don't do interviews that way, so maybe that's why I feel that way. So it's going to be completely different for every company. It can be scary because it feels like you're doing an oral exam, right? But I think that a lot of the advice that has been given by Samuel, by Nadia, by everybody else is really valuable. Take that into heart when you go into the tech interview. Mostly, one of the things that I will say for me is have a project ready that you can talk about. At least have, like, if they don't have you do like an actual whiteboard session, have a project that you know in and out that you can talk about its technology, about how it was built, about what parts you did, and being able to talk technically about that project. The whiteboarding session, the main thing that most interviewers are trying to answer is, can this person embrace uncertainty, ambiguity, and still find a way to perform? I think that it was Nadia who presented the best example of that, so I won't even go through that because it was perfect. It was true. It's basically very, very true. But ultimately, this is the question that a lot of the interviewers are trying to answer. Can you embrace uncertainty, ambiguity, and still find a way to perform? As developers, that's what we do all the time. There's so much ambiguity in our code. There's so much ambiguity in like what is required. And can you find a way to still perform through that? Like mentioned before, some companies will focus more on the current language and framework and knowledge, framework knowledge of the candidate. Other companies will focus more on the algorithm and problem solving skills about how you approach the problem during the whiteboard session. And just a little bit of more additional interview advice. The interview is as much an opportunity for you to better get to know the company and its culture, work ethic, as it is for the company to know what you bring to the table. I really want to emphasize this because it's really, especially when you're first starting off in your career, you have this feeling of like, I just want a company to hire me, right? I just want somebody to get from my skills and just take and just hire me. Take this opportunity as a way to also you gauge the company. Ask questions about their company, ask questions about their culture. Show interest in the company and the work they do during the work process and during the process and interactions with the recruiters' interviews. The most important thing that I can say about the interview process, if you can make it into a conversation and you can make it into something where you can tell your story, that's the most likely to succeed during the interview process. With that being said, that's all I got. Thank you very much for your time. I think I did go over the 5 minutes. I'm really sorry. I took the time. I tried to be as fast as I could.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. I will let you relinquish control here of the screen and awesome. All right. Let me switch it back to gallery view here. So we are at time. So what I'm going to do is take, I think there's like 6 or 7 unanswered questions and put those in a Google Doc. I'm going to send those out to our speakers if they wish to add to that. That'd be awesome. But I just want to give a huge virtual round to Aisha, Samuel, Nadia, Giselle, Dan. Thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you, all of you that stuck around for 2 hours in general, taking your own time. There's a lot going on. None of us are paid to be here, not even me. This is just something we wanted to do as the hosts, but hopefully it's been very valuable to you. So thank you all very much.